نستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا وشفيعنا محمدًا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل في سورة البقرة بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this verse of Surah Al-Baqarah that it is the month of Ramadan in which the Quran was revealed as guidance to humanity and of manifest signs of that guidance and a criterion to discern and distinguish between truth and falsehood. Therefore, whoever witnesses this month, let him fast in it. And whoever amongst you is ill or is on a journey, then let him make them days up in another time. Allah wishes ease for you. Allah does not wish difficulty. يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Allah wishes ease for you and Allah does not wish difficulty. And so that you complete the days and you glorify and exalt and praise Allah Azza wa Jal upon the guidance that you have been given, and so that you are grateful. Dear respected listeners, I have recited a famous verse of the Quran in front of you that you will have heard time and time again. And this verse in the Quran, which can be found in Surah Al-Baqarah, has three main topics. The first topic that's discussed within this verse is related to the month of Ramadan and fasting. So that's one subject that we find within this verse in relation to Ramadan and fasting. The second main subject that we find within this verse is to do with the Quran, the revelation of the Quran. So that's the second subject that we find within this verse. And the third subject that we find is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ, that Allah wishes ease for you and Allah does not wish difficulty. So the subject of yusr, the subject of ease, is also found within this verse. Now, the first two subjects around the month of Ramadan and fasting and the revelation of the Quran are subjects that we are familiar with and we have heard much about, especially in this month of Ramadan. Public speakers often speak about these subjects quite regularly. So I don't intend to touch upon that today. But the third subject that I have mentioned in relation to yusr, in relation to ease, is something I intend to speak about today and inshallah continue tomorrow. Now, the subject of yusr, the subject of ease, has not only been mentioned here in this verse of the Quran, but has been mentioned elsewhere by Allah Azza wa Jal, but also it has been mentioned in the hadith by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. To give you one example of where the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned this, can be found in Bukhari, where a Bedouin comes into the masjid and urinates. The Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, upon witnessing this, are incensed and become angry. And as a result of becoming angry and incensed and enraged, they intend to lynch this Bedouin because of what he has done in the masjid. And here the Prophet ﷺ stops them and says, leave him, da'uhu, leave him. And then says that pour a bucket of water over the urine to clean the masjid. And then the Prophet ﷺ turns around and says in one narration, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُم مُيَسِّرِينَ وَلَمْ تُبْعَثُوا مُعَسِّرِينَ, that you have only been sent to create ease and you have not been sent to create difficulty. So here we see clearly an example of where a Bedouin is doing something in the masjid which is contrary to the sanctity and the sacredness of the masjid, yet the Prophet ﷺ is advising the Sahaba to express yusr and ease and to be gentle and kind towards that Bedouin for what he has done, and not to be harsh towards him. So we see an example here in this particular hadith of that yusr, of that ease being expressed in action through the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And therefore this subject of yusr is something which is a recurring theme in the Quran and Sunnah, yet what we find in particular among practicing Muslims is that we fail to appreciate the importance of this. Hence the reason why I wish to focus on this today and tomorrow, inshallah. Now, before we go into this subject of yusr and ease and what that means in Islam, if we take a step back and ask the question, why is it important to understand this subject of ease? Why is it important to understand the importance of adopting yusr and ease in our behavior and actions? Why is that important? The answer to that question is because of the context in particular that we live in. The context we live in, what we are seeing is what Moulana Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi rahmatullahi alayhi used to refer to as dhihni or i'tiqadi irtidad, intellectual and doctrinal apostasy. People are leaving Islam. So apparently they may seem Muslim, but in their mind and in their heart they are uncomfortable with Islam, and at many times even accept it to themselves that they do not believe in Islam. And these people may exist in our midst, walk and talk with us, eat and drink with us, yet we do not realize that in their hearts they are not comfortable with Islam. This is becoming a growing phenomenon, especially if we go into secular circles. We will experience this more often. And these cases aren't something that are restricted to cosmopolitan cities like London or Birmingham anymore. Even I know of examples from where I come from in Blackburn where this is happening. People are actually leaving Islam. So it's not something that's restricted to down south or to cosmopolitan cities like London. Rather, we find this now in small towns like Blackburn as well, and in cities like Preston. We will find these examples. And in the midst of where people are uncomfortable with their faith, aren't happy being Muslims, find it difficult to understand Islam, in that particular context, what becomes even more important is to emphasize this teaching of the Quran and Sunnah in relation to yusr, in relation to ease. That becomes even more important. And the reason why that becomes even more important is because if we are to adopt a harsh, judgmental, attitude towards such people, then rather than drawing them closer to the deen, we are going to drive them even further away from the deen. Therefore, to have a gentle, kind, and loving attitude towards such people is of utmost importance. And that's where the teaching around yusr is applicable. That if we are easy in our approach towards them, then we are more likely to get them back within the fold of Islam. And if we adopt usr, and if we become harsh in our approach, then most likely that is going to drive them even further away from the deen. Therefore, this subject of yusr is particularly important in our context, and therefore requires much thought and reflection on our part, so that we can implement it and practice it in our lives. Now, before I move on to what I intend to discuss about this subject, it's important to review our intentions. Why are we sitting in this gathering today, listening to this speech? The Akabir of Islam, the elders of Islam, especially of recent times from the Indian subcontinent, have spoken about the intention one should have when sitting in a speech. In particular, Moulana Masihullah Khan, rahmatullahi alayh, has mentioned 6 or 7 reasons why people sit in bayans and in speeches. And that becomes particularly important for us, because if our intention is not correct when we are sitting and listening to the speech, then we aren't going to benefit as we ought to from what is going to be said. Now, this may be a month where people may be disconnected from different forms of entertainment, and as a result of that may want to find that entertainment through the masjid or through some public speaker. But if we have come to this speech today with the intention of leisure or entertainment, then I'm sorry to say, but you're going to be drastically disappointed, because I'm not a very good entertainer. By far, I'm not a pop star. So you're not going to be entertained by what I have to say. So if you have that intention, then you are going to be really disappointed by what I have to say. But if our intention today is to learn better what our deen has to say about this subject of yusr, of this subject around ease, and how that can bring about islah for us, how that can rectify us spiritually, then inshallah, if we sit in this speech with this intention that we want to understand the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal better, and we want to understand what the ulama have to say in a better way, and if we and want to, after understanding that, want to implement it in our lives, then inshallah, with that intention, we will you will have a fruitful experience, inshallah. So moving on, in relation to the subject of yusr, there is a hadith that can be found in Bukhari, where the Prophet ﷺ says, "Inna ad-deena yusr," indeed religion is easy. وَلَا يُشَادَّ الدِّينَ أَحَدٌ إِلَّا غَلَبَهُ, and no one wrestles or tries to overpower religion except that religion overcomes him. No one tries to wrestle with religion except that religion will overpower him and overcome him. In relation to this hadith, the commentators have mentioned much. And in particular, what I would like to share with you in these couple of days is what Mufti Taqi Uthmani, Hafizahullah, says in relation to this hadith. Mufti Taqi Sahib starts off in the commentary of this hadith by raising the question, by mentioning the ishkal or raising the question that if deen is easy, as this hadith has mentioned, then why is it that in our day-to-day lives, when we try to implement Islam, we find it difficult? So for example, when we fast, we may find fasting difficult. We may find salah difficult, in particular fajr. To wake up for Fajr, we may find that difficult. We may find going to Hajj difficult. So when we in Hajj, the 5 days of Hajj, we may find that difficult. So the ibadat and just generally the practice of deen may be an experience which is not always easy for us. So why is it that the Prophet ﷺ says that deen is easy, religion is easy, and no one tries to wrestle with religion except that religion overpowers them? Why is the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith saying that? Mufti Taqi Sahib in response to that says that the religion requires a certain level of mashaqqa, a certain level of difficulty or struggle, a certain level of mujahada and struggle is required in our deen. Without that, we can't practice our deen. So a certain level of struggle is required, and therefore we find verses in the Quran like Alif Lam Mim ahasiba an-nasu an yutraku an yaqulu amanna wa hum la yuftanun. Alif Lam Mim, do people think that they will be left alone once they have testified to faith and they will not be tested? Meaning that they will surely be tested. They will surely be tested. So we find such verses in the Quran. Similarly, we find in another place in the Quran, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ, that indeed the human being has been created in difficulty. The human being has been created in toil. The human being has to experience a level of struggle. So a level of struggle is required in our deen. But what Mufti Sahib says is that level of struggle isn't such that is beyond our capacity, neither is it such that it creates severe hardship for us. It creates haraj for us, severe hardship for us. So the deen requires a level of mashaqqa, a level of mujahada, a level of struggle from us, but the struggle isn't such that it breaks our backs and we find it impossible to practice, or we find it very difficult to practice. Rather, it is possible to practice after we get into the habit of it. But initially, there may be a struggle involved in our practice. So this is what Mufti Sahib says here in the commentary of the hadith, that religion is easy, but that doesn't negate that there is a level of struggle that's required from us in order to practice and implement religion into our lives. But that struggle isn't such that it's going to break our back or it's going to really make life difficult for us. If it is going to make life difficult for us, then there's two reasons why that may be. Number one is that we haven't got into the habit of the deen, and therefore our nafs is accustomed to that level of struggle, or we have actually misunderstood Islam, and therefore the way we understand the ahkam of Islam, the rules and laws of Islam, are actually incorrect, and therefore we are bringing about, as a result of our understanding, difficulty upon us unnecessarily. So these are the two potential reasons why we may find the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal difficult. Number one, because our nafs is not accustomed to that level of struggle, and number two, because of our misunderstanding of Islam, which is creating difficulty for us. So then, if there isn't difficulty in Islam to the level that it is impossible or creates severe hardship for us, then why is it that, what is the message the Prophet ﷺ is trying to give us here? In the second part of the hadith that I've quoted, the Prophet ﷺ, after saying that the religion is easy, says that no one tries to wrestle and overpower religion except that religion overpowers them. Meaning that if we start to exaggerate within the deen, if we become excessive in our deen, if we try to go overboard in our deen, then we can never compete with Allah. Allah will always win. That's the point that the Prophet ﷺ here is making. And therefore, what the Prophet ﷺ is alluding to is al-ghuluw fi din, being excessive and exaggerating in religion. In a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, and which has been narrated and recorded by Imam Nasa'i and Imam Ibn Majah, rahmatullahi alayhima, the Prophet ﷺ says, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالْغُلُوَّ فِي الدِّينِ فَإِنَّهُ أَهْلَكَ مَنْ كَانَ قَبْلَكُمْ الْغُلُوُّ فِي الدِّينِ. That beware of ghulu, excessiveness and exaggeration in religion, for indeed those that came before you were destroyed because of being excessive and exaggerating in their religion. Because of being excessive and exaggerating in their religion, they were destroyed. Therefore, beware of exaggerating in your faith, in your deen, in your religion. So, if we fail to appreciate the yusr, the ease of Islam, then inadvertently what we are doing is that we are guilty of al-ghulu. We are guilty of being excessive and exaggerating in our deen. And here, Mufti Taqi Sahib gives examples of 6 ways in which we can be excessive and exaggerate in our deen. 6 kinds of al-ghulu fi din have been given by Mufti Taqi Sahib in the commentary of this hadith. In the deen yusr, indeed religion is easy. In the commentary of that, Mufti Taqi Sahib gives 6 examples or 6 types or 6 ways in which we can go overboard in our practice of religion. The first example he gives, or the first type of ghulu that Mufti Taqi mentions, is that we go overboard in nawafil. So in optional prayers, and similarly in optional ibadat in general, in our optional worship, we become excessive. So for example, we worship the whole night, or we fast throughout the year. These are examples of excessiveness in worship. So to go overboard in nafil. And then as a result of that, during the day, when it comes to our work or when it comes to our studies, we sleep through our work or we sleep through our studies. That's an example of how we can be excessive in our deen. That we worshipped all night and haven't slept, and therefore we end up sleeping through the day and therefore not doing what we meant to be doing during the day. So that's one example of how we can do ghulu in deen, is that we become excessive in worship. We don't adopt worship in moderation. So rather than doing a bit of ibadat in the night, we end up spending the whole night in ibadah. And as a result of that, the day after, we suffer. And therefore, we aren't able to do what we are meant to do during the day. So that's one example that Mufti Taqi Sahib gives of al-ghulu fi din, of being excessive in one's practice of religion. And therefore, in a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ was approached by some Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, who were being excessive in their salah and in their fasting, and wanted to adopt a lifestyle which was contrary to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ turned around and said to them, Inna li jasadika alayka haqqa. Indeed, your body has a right over you. And in another narration, wa inna li nafsika alayka haqqa. Indeed, yourself has a right over you. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, wa inna li zawjika alayka haqqa. Indeed, your spouse, your wife has a right over you. Wa inna li aynika alayka haqqa. Indeed, your eyes also have a right over you. So here, what the Prophet ﷺ is teaching is balance. is wasatiyya, is balance that's being taught here. That not only do we have a duty towards Allah Azza wa Jal, that we worship Him, but we also have a duty towards others, hukukul ibad, the rights of others. We also have a duty towards others, but we also have a duty towards oneself, hukukul nafs, the rights of the self. Therefore, the accomplished mu'min, the accomplished believer understands this, that they have duties towards Allah, they have duties towards others, and they have duties towards themselves, and therefore they try to balance these three things. They do not exaggerate in one or the other. Rather, they find a happy medium and a happy balance between these three. And therefore, by finding a happy balance, what they do is they avoid ghulu fi din. They avoid being excessive and exaggerating in religion. So that's one type of ghulu fi din that Mufti Taqi Sahib mentions. The second type of al-ghulu fi din that Mufti Taqi Sahib mentions is to do with always practicing the azima. Always practicing the azima. So in Islam, many a time what we have is we have two options. So certain things, certain a'mal, what we'll have, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us two options. So there's the more resolute option, the option which requires greater struggle but is not necessary. And then there's a rukhsah, there's a dispensation, that if you do this, then your duty is finished, but there is a higher level that you can aspire to, the more resolute position, the azima, which you can also adopt. So what Mufti Taqi Sahib says is to always adopt the higher level, to always adopt the azima, the higher level, the more resolute position, when there is a rukhsah, when there is a dispensation or position which is easier, is also ghulu fi din. To always take the more harder position is also an example of being excessive and going overboard in the practice of one's religion. The example that Mufti Sahib cites is that if one has a udhr, one has a legitimate excuse to do tayammum, yet one becomes adamant that they always want to do wudu. So they've got a legitimate excuse, they have a marad, they have some kind of illness which allows them to do tayammum, yet that person constantly and makes a habit of doing wudu, then that is an example of ghulu fi din, of being excessive in religion. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you a lesser option, yet you take the harder option as a habit. That is an example that Mufti Taqi Sahib gives of always adopting the azima, always adopting the resolute position. And in finishing today, Mufti Taqi Sahib gives 6 kinds, and inshallah we'll complete the remaining 4 tomorrow, inshallah. But in finishing, the second example that he cites, or the second kind of ghulu that Mufti Taqi Sahib mentions, is in relation to the azima, that to always adopt the azima, to always adopt the more resolute position, the harder position, and not to take the easier position. In relation to that, the reason behind why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam may consider that to be ghulu, may consider that to be excessive and going overboard in the practice of one's religion, is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Rahim and Rahman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful towards us. And therefore, if He is merciful towards us, what He wants from us is ijz and tawadu. What He wants from us is humility. So when it comes to the practice of the deen as well, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants through our ibadah is He wants to see how His servant is being humble. So if we make a habit of taking the more resolute position, then inadvertently what we are saying to Allah Azza wa Jal is, I can take it. So it's a form of arrogance that I can always be hard and strong. I can always fulfill the highest level in the deen. And therefore it shows a particular attitude which is contrary to humility. And therefore to take the easier position can be an act of humility and draw one as a result closer to Allah Azza wa Jal. So to always adopt the harder position isn't the way to Allah Azza wa Jal always. Rather, at times to adopt the easier position can be an expression of humility, and therefore can be something which has greater acceptance with Allah Azza wa Jal. And on that note, inshallah, I'll conclude. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the understanding of the deen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those that appreciate the yusr and the ease that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted us. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from ghulu and being excessive in our deen. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. इंफिरादी तौर पर दुआ कर लीजिए. If you wish to engage in dua or any other form of ibadah, then you may do that individually, inshallah.